All right. Good morning, Doug. We are back with viewer Q&A, but we're doing it a little bit different this time. That's because these questions are coming from members of our new subscription service called File. And there's a link for that below this video in the description if you'd like to find out more. So, and if you'd like your questions answered in the future, best thing to do is join File and we'll ask questions there regularly and answer them as many as we can on Fridays typically. So Doug, let's go ahead and get started with the questions. Number one, what sector outside of commodities would you invest in these days?
Yeah, I've been looking for one, quite frankly, but I can't find anything. Bonds? No, it's not the time for bonds. Interest rates are going higher, etc. I don't know any other sector of the economy. Listen, maybe somebody out there is aware of something that I'm not, that is cheap and has explosive upside potential. But commodities are where it's at. I'm sorry. The bright side is that I've always been kind of a specialist in commodities. So this is one of those times when cyclically commodities are the place to be. So I'm not going to not be in commodities just for the sake of not being in commodities.
Right.
Nope, it's the place to be. And if you see anything that looks better, please let me know and we'll take a look at it and talk about it.
Okay. The next question is, do you have a recommended allocation for invested assets? For instance, 20% cash, 20% stocks, 30% crypto, et cetera. But do you have any model like that you've used in the past? And is it different now?
The standard model that Wall Street and conventional money managers have always used is 50% or 60%, depending on your age. The older you are, the more bonds you want. The younger you are, the more stocks. Half bonds, half stocks is the way they usually pitch it. Well, that's turned out to be disastrous because in the last year or two, since interest rates have been going up, and since bonds are in a hyper bubble right now, I'd say that the proper allocation for bonds is about 0%. So forget about that. Perhaps the most intelligent allocation method was something that my friend Harry Brown developed years ago, and he called it the permanent portfolio. You can Google it and find out. But it was like 25% precious metals, 25 to foreign currencies, 20% bonds, but in strong currency issuers, and 30% in industrial stocks and so forth. The key to it, though, wasn't this arbitrary breakdown into so many things. The key to it was this, is that every year you would readjust it so that if your precious metals part of the portfolio had doubled, now instead of being 30% of the portfolio, it was 60%. Well, that meant you had to sell half of it to go back to the 30%. It was an automatic way of selling high. And therefore, when something was underperforming, like industrial stocks, and say they went from 30% to 15%, okay, now you double up on them and you're going to not going to bottom ticket, but you're going to be buying relatively low. And you do that consistently over time, it ought to work out. So I think that is a very intelligent approach. Divide your portfolio into several intelligent sections and percentage wise, and keep those percentages stable by realigning them every year. You'll automatically be buying low and selling high in these different sectors.
That's smart.
As good a method as I can think of. Do I use it personally? I keep it in mind, but no, I'm not that well disciplined.
Okay. All right. Next question is, if the banks have liquidity issues or shortage of collateral, does Doug see bail-ins happening? Is it likely people will be able to access their money or deploy capital properly during market panic if their money is parked in institutions that are levered to the hilt?
Yeah, well, I guess the first bail-in in recent times was what happened in Cyprus.
Yeah.
Was that 8 years ago? I don't know, something like that. And since then, my understanding is that almost all of the banks in all of the countries of the Western world have that written into the laws, making it legal. So that I would expect that's going to happen. It's a good reason not to keep more than the insured amount. And of course, the insurance is all bullshit anyway. It's what we call the sticker principle. It, it builds confidence because people say, oh, the FDIC, which is vastly undercapitalized, will give me my money back if my bank fails. Well, the US government will print up money and give it back to you. But as serious and big as this problem is, I wouldn't doubt if you have a lot of money in a bank account, they might give you a haircut. So the answer to the question is if you're fortunate enough to have more than $250,000, which is the insurance amount in the US, I don't know what it is in Canada or other countries at this point, have other accounts and other banks. So that's the way you get around that. But all of the banks are, look, all of the banks are the whole system is bankrupt. And I've talked about this before, but it's worth reemphasizing because I'm not sure everybody either gets it or takes it seriously if they get it. You've got two problems. Number one, it's that there's no longer a distinction between savings accounts or time deposits and checking accounts or demand deposits. These are two totally different businesses, totally different things. Shouldn't even be the same institution, quite frankly. Checking accounts, you pay the bank for storing your gold, actually, or money, if you dollars, if you wish, securely, and the privilege of writing checks and transferring it. Costs money, so they charge money for both of these things. Savings accounts are totally different. You deposit your gold or dollars for a specified period of time and a specified rate of interest. That allows the institution to lend it out to somebody for a specified length of time and interest. And the liabilities and assets should be matched that way so that there can't be a run on the bank. And of course, when banks lend out money, historically, these things have not been for consumer loans. That's ridiculous. Banks lending for consumer loans. It used to be, hey, if you want something, you saved up for it and you bought it.
Right.
You don't borrow money for a depreciating asset. I mean, that's economically stupid for the borrower, and it's going to prove to be economically stupid for the lender too. So anyway, all this has gone by the boards. One reason why the banks are at least illiquid, but actually insolvent. And this is worth a much longer discussion. Second reason, though, is the fractional reserve system, where since all the banks in a given country, like the US, are all members of the banking system. The Fed lets them, if you lend $1,000 out, that $1,000, you can lend it out by creating it. The banks actually inflate the currency much more than the Fed does, actually. You lend $1,000 out, and maybe it'll come back to you. So now you've got $1,000 loan you're collecting interest on, and the guy deposits it back in your bank, or from some other bank it's deposited. So it's in the system. And you lend it out again, and it happens again, and you lend it out again. And so this is why banks like to make loans, but it increases the amount of money in circulation. And in the past, when banks had to be run on a sound basis, if a banker lent out money that he didn't have on deposit, people would notice, gee, there's a lot of money out there, and that bank is making a lot of money. And there would be a run on the bank. And of course, the bank couldn't meet the run. It doesn't work that way anymore. So anyway, not a good structured explanation, just kind of laying down the principle. But all of the banks in the world basically are violating both of these principles: differentiation of savings and checking accounts, and they all use fractional reserve, which is why banking is such a profitable business, and making all kinds of stupid, hairy, scary loans. So the answer to the question is, yeah, all these banks are bankrupt. That's the bad news. The good news, kind of, is the government's going to bail them all out. But wait a minute, the governments are bankrupt too. I mean, the US government is never going to pay off its 31 or $32 trillion of debt. They disclosed debt. Forget about other liabilities, which will be activated that are 100 trillion more. So it's a scary situation. I don't know if I've answered the question or not.
I did see there's a tweet by JP Morgan the other day said that they were sitting on $1.2 trillion of cash. And when I saw that, that's depositors' money, right? So it's kind of it's immediately saying the whole bail-in thing. It kind of demonstrated very clearly to me that they didn't say, we're holding this much money of your money. We're saying they counted it as part of their balance sheet against their liabilities. It's theirs if they need it. They can access it if they want it. Your money is their money.
Yeah, as a general rule, I suspect your money is probably better off with a brokerage firm, a stock brokerage firm, than with a bank. Because brokers, well, this depends. I mean, you got to read somebody's balance sheet, but generally their main liabilities are margin loans. And if they mark the account to the market, they just sell you out. Shouldn't be as risky, but who can tell what they're doing? I mean, look, it used to be considered that commodity accounts were sacrosanct. And if you had an account with a clearing commodity broker, that was about as good as it got. But then you had this guy it was a son Corzine. Yeah, and he lost, I don't know how much he lost, hundreds of millions, and he blew up. What was the name of this? And he got away with it. Yeah, exactly. So nothing's safe. It's funny. Really, nothing's safe anywhere. Most people don't think about it. So they figure, yeah, everything's always gone along. It's kind of safe. But the better you get to know the system, the less safe it looks to you. And it's scary because you can't sleep soundly at night when you realize that we're like Wile E. Coyote walking on air and don't know it yet.
Right. Right. Okay. Next question. It says, as I got more successful in 2021 and 2022, I felt less happy. In a world where the sanity of our file is rare, how can we as individuals and as a group help make a difference in the world, in your opinion? But I think the first part about why do you think someone like that feels when you're more successful, he says he felt happy.
Yeah, I understand that. And it's a very good observation. Maybe because you've got more to lose. Look, a very old friend of mine that I've ridden the rails with, his name is Bo Keeley. Very interesting guy. I'm not going to bore everybody with telling you his wild and woolly past. But Bo basically has nothing and lives in a hole in the ground in the Mojave Desert. But he probably reads more than anybody else that I can think of. And he seems perfectly happy. He doesn't have anything. So having a bunch of shit definitely does not make you happy. In fact, the more shit you have, the more you got to worry about because you don't want to lose it. It's absolutely perverse. I mean, you need the stuff. You want more of it for survival purposes, but it makes you more unhappy because it's troubling because you might have it taken away from you.
Well, and in Fight Club, there's this quote. It's something like, eventually the stuff you own owns you.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. So cosmic problem, I'm not exactly sure how to deal with it, except to try not to be attached to any of this stuff. I mean, I try to put that theory into practice in my own mind, not to be attached to anything.
But maybe also the definition of success is wrong because it feels maybe he's accomplishing something he thought defined as success is becoming more and more matching up with what that model of success is. But in fact, that actually is not something that he might not really value. Or, if you're chasing the wrong thing, then that could explain why you'd be less and less satisfied with your life as you get closer to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've remarked before, I'm trying, I don't know how successful I'm being, to emulate a Taoist monk, not a Buddhist monk, a Taoist monk. Well, Taoist monk is ideally in the world, but not of it. Buddhist monk doesn't want to be in the world at all. So what do you do about it? What was the second part of the question? So there was,
In a world where the file sanity is rare, how can we as individuals or as a group help make a difference in the world?
well, the way I see it is we're social beings, and I feel better when I'm close to and associate with people that I think are good and decent and right thinking and so forth. To me, this generates a feeling of safety and warmth, which is a good part of being happy, I think.
I think so too.
If I was, if I had to be associated with the kind of people that populate Washington, D.C., I wouldn't feel good or safe or warm or anything. I'd be antagonistic. I'd feel like a snake in a snake pit.
Yeah.
Not a very appealing image. So I think that monitoring your associations is the best thing you can do. And I'm all for family values. Chances are reasonably good that people in your family will be people that you share values with. But there's absolutely no guarantee about that. So that I think you should basically choose your family, not have your family chosen for you by your genes,
Mm.
quite frankly. So I don't know, just listen, other people are very important. I mean, if you associate with good other people that are smart and have Boy Scout virtues and you bring something to the party, when they find something good and are looking for capital, for instance, well, maybe you supply the capital and you all get wealthy together. But if you're surrounded by criminals and sociopaths and scumbags, chances of getting into a good deal are pretty close to zero. So I'd say it's essential, and to answer the question, that you monitor your associates closely and try to change them if they're not what they should be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of like very practical benefits of being surrounded by the right people, but there's also a lot of more intangible benefits that I think are really rewarding. Like I like some of my friends as I see them, if I as I see them accomplish more in the world, like it impresses me and I admire for being surrounded by people that I respect and admire is a real pleasure. It's a real luxury, I think, to be surrounded by people like that. They make me want to be better, want to try harder myself, not out of competitive nature, but just because I see them doing it by choice, stepping up by choice, doing more by choice, and it makes me want to do more. So I think there's a lot of good, healthy benefits with being associated with the right people. No doubt about it.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think any of these people that live within the Beltway in Washington, D.C. can feel that way because they're associated basically with other sociopaths. The main emotion they feel isn't happiness at seeing friends do well. It's Schadenfreude seeing their enemies destroy themselves, which they
Yeah.
usually
Either,
do.
either that or envy, right?
Yeah, envy, right? Exactly.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Okay. Next question. The Fed seems to be working in opposition to the US government and the World Economic Forum for fairly obvious reasons, namely self preservation of the Fed and its shareholders. Now, this sounds like he's talking about, is it Tom Luongo? I think that's how you pronounce his name. It sounds like his basic view of the world, where he basically thinks the Fed is essentially at war with the World Economic Forum and others who are basically these competing monetary interests. What's your whole take on that whole view? Do you think there's something to that?
Gee, I don't know. I mean, is that saying that the Fed are kind of the good guys and these other central bankers the bad guys? That doesn't sound right to me. I don't know anything about Tom Luongo except I listened to a pod with my friend Jim Kunstler, which is worthwhile listening to us. If you go to I don't know how you find
It's go to kunstler.com is his
Kunstler.
website. Finally.
Yeah. Anyway, you can listen to the podcast he had with Luongo. I don't know. Luongo seems like a decent enough guy. I mean, I don't know him really, and I don't know whether the Fed is trying to do things at odds with the IMF or whatever. I mean, these people they're all the same kind of people. I mean, who knows what machinations they've got going, what kind of court intrigues that they have going. But I don't know what the answer to the question is.
Yeah, I mean, we do see because I think the compelling case he makes, the thing that seems compelling to me, is just because there is the driving up of the U.S. of rates by the Fed, whereas every other central bank in the world is essentially already reversed course on that, is basically supporting their currencies, just trying to, and when the dollar, because of its strength, is just laying waste to the rest of the world's economics or financial systems, that because that seems to be true, then that then make you think, well, maybe they're doing that on purpose. Maybe there's a reason behind that other than just trying to actually lower inflation here in the US.
That's not non-realistic or unreasonable way of looking at it. And if I was running one of these foreign central banks, God forbid, I would say, well, if I raise interest rates, it may bankrupt a lot of entities and individuals in this country. But on the other hand, if I don't raise interest rates, our currency goes down the toilet and they're caught between a rock and a hard place at this point. I don't know what they're actually going to do. But the reason why the dollar is being strong is because there's all this debt in dollars. And people are buying dollars because they need it to service the debt. So, and since the dollar is the big international currency where most of the debt is, how is this thing going to blow up? So I'm just asking myself how it's going to end. Well, I don't know. It's a question of abnormal psychology as much as anything else.
Hmm.
You can look at the economics and say that this is another giant distortion being created. And I'm not sure how it's going to wind up. On the other hand, a lot of what's happening is being controlled by individuals. And these are marginally sane people at best. So
Hmm.
it's it's tough to predict.
Okay. All right. What's your take on commercial?
Maybe somebody's got an answer out there that they can bring to our attention how it's going to end.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Boy, I think that is the $64,000 question, I think. I mean, everybody wants to know that one.
Does Tom Luongo have any special insights that would,
All,
any
all of
special knowledge that would make his views?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he has a very conspiratorial view of it all. And it's not that there are good guys that the Fed, it's just that the Fed is acting against, in his view, the World Economic Forum and some of these globalist interests. So I think that's which the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
I'd imagine that.
Luongo is also an ANCAP,
Yep.
which tells me that he's at least got some sound fundamentals someplace. So I don't know.
Yep, it's interesting. Interesting. So, okay, well, what's your take on commercial real estate, retail, office, warehouse, industrial, that sort of thing? Do you have a opinion?
Yeah, not favorable because standard of living goes down. The average guy, unless you're talking about the Dollar General or some kind of store like that, isn't going to be going to the shopping mall and wandering around and consuming so much anymore. So
Yeah.
retail, not very good. And in addition to that macroeconomic thing, things are being delivered by UPS and FedEx and Amazon and God knows what, cheaper and faster. And so retail's competing against that too. And a lot of people are just using retail stores as to get a kind of a price level and get it cheaper elsewhere online. I don't know. Retail's in a tough road to hoe. I wouldn't want to be in that business. What was it? Office buildings. Well, I mean, this recent pandemic hysteria has shown that people can and sometimes should more effectively not go to the office and work from home. It's a double-edged sword that way. But that and a slowdown generally in the economy tells me that we're going to have a lot of empty office space. So I don't think now's the time to buy office space or speculate in that yet. Warehouses, not so sure. That might be good.
Even with warehouses, I heard that Amazon is dramatically cutting back their warehouse additions. So they're scaling back their plans, but I guess probably based upon some economic forecast that they're making.
Yeah, people generally consuming less because the whole country, not to mention the Western world has been over consuming. And one good area of real estate has been the storage units
Yeah.
with the chain link fence around them. Okay. Is that still going to be good? Well, I don't know. Maybe the time is coming when people are saying, wait a minute, why am I storing this stuff? It's costing me $100 or $200 a month not using this crap. Why don't I just have a yard sale and get rid of it and cut my expenses? I don't know. It's been a great business so far. Will it continue? Not so sure of that either.
Okay. Let's see. Doug, what is it that gave you the biggest laugh recently? Anything funny stand out to you in the last week or two?
I should have made a note because these things come and go. Yeah, I'll have to keep the best memes that I see and or see, so we could play them here because everybody likes a good laugh.
Yeah. I mean, the best thing that we had, I think, this week was just laughing about the Ukrainian gay orgy plan that we saw. That
Yeah,
was a meme. That was actually it's planned.
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Next question.
What makes life worth living? You want to joke, jive, socialize, blow dope, start coke, and practice your stroke. Well, maybe not all those things, but
Certainly the joking and jiving sounds good.
no doubt about it. So I'll try to keep that in mind.
All right. This guy says his wife is Filipino. He's planning to move from Texas to the Philippines next year. And they've been waiting for the price of precious metals to increase before making that move, I guess. What are your any comments on moving to the Philippines or precious metals?
Well, I'm a big fan of the Philippines, always have been. Generally nice place. I stay away from the southern islands where, the Hucks and where when the US took over the Philippines 100 years ago, where they killed, I don't know, 20,000, 100,000 people. Nobody knows how many people they killed there. And it's Islamic. So, but other than that, I like the Philippines a lot. But there are what, 10,000 islands in the Philippines?
Hmm.
So, and they each have their own little culture. And even in Manila, there's different areas that are very different from each other. So, good idea. And I'm bullish on gold at this point, frankly. So I think it's off today. I think it went down a few more bucks today, but it doesn't matter. So I think he's probably right on both things.
Okay. All right. Guy says, Doug once said, when everything is happening, anything can happen. But what's the likelihood of an SCO peacekeeping force and a UN peacekeeping force entering the Ukraine, where we see friendly fire between UN Burundi soldiers shooting an SCO Tajikistani soldier?
What is SCO again?
I think that's the Shanghai Cooperative Organization. It's like the opposite of NATO.
Oh, I see. The new thing the Russians are putting together with the
Exactly.
Chinese, the Indians, and Iranians, and so forth. Gee, I don't know. Yeah, it's amazing.
It would
So
be pretty
maybe,
amazing though to have these people from all over the world fighting over a piece of territory that no one's.
yeah, it's really rather comical. I mean, maybe Ukraine will be a perpetual war zone, which is actually has been for the last 1,000 years, more or less. So, the plus the French say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. God, I don't know. We're dealing with crazy people.
We are. Okay. What do you have I guess this viewer is surprised that Bitcoin has not collapsed further than I think it's at 18,000 something at this point. Do you have any thoughts on why that hasn't gone down more?
Well, I don't really know what Bitcoin should be trading at. I mean, I've got an idea what gold should be trading at based on a lot of history and production, all kinds of things. I mean, I don't know what Bitcoin should be at. My guess, I mean, and I'm thinking actually of buying some Bitcoin in here just because it's down, what, 2/3 from its previous peak.
Yeah, a little more.
And I think it's got a future. I really do. So that's just an opinion, a relatively uninformed one. I mean, you follow these things much more than I do. Like our friend Marco Wutzer he's got all kinds of ideas that are very interesting about new blockchain products out there. Got to talk to him. Of course, Nick Giambruno, who follows these things very closely too, says that almost 99.9% of all these cryptocurrencies, and they're all crap.
Yeah.
They're worth nothing. The
Yeah, he's
token,
kind of a Bitcoin maximalist.
Yes, he is. I'm not sure what to believe, although I do believe in Bitcoin. I think it's a worthwhile asset to have, especially now. What do you think?
I mean, I definitely think it has a future. I think it's got a lot of difficulty it's got to go through, though. I haven't seen the puke point with it yet, which just makes me hold back from buying more at this point because it has gone down a lot, but I haven't seen that like vomit stage yet where everyone just says, I don't want anything to do with this anymore, which we've seen with Bitcoin at least 3 other times in its life that I've been involved with it. So it does seem like it's got a lot more room to go down from here. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it maybe got as low as below 10,000 again. I
And
think it's possible, but I do think there's a future. I do.
yeah, I can see how that's possible if all the markets crash and all this type of thing. People need capital for urgent things, and their Bitcoin might go on the block. And yeah,
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's like just like the way the markets have all drifted down a lot. The markets are all way down, but we haven't had this crisis vomit moment in any of them yet. And I think that's got to be still be coming, doesn't it? Doesn't that always happen?
I think so. I'm not looking forward to it. It's going to be very scary,
Yeah.
unpleasant.
So I'm expecting that to happen. And I'm kind of waiting for that to buy more Bitcoin personally.
Yeah.
All right, Doug, how do you sell out of profitable investments? What's your criteria to sell? And do you scale out of the investment? I mean, are there any key rules of thumb as to how to, because I know I've screwed this up a lot where I've had real winners. I've held on to them until they turn into real losers. So how do you know when to sell?
Well, it's all a matter of psychology. And when everybody's talking about it at cocktail parties, which thank God I don't go to anymore since I stopped playing polo. Yeah, that's a tip off. Things that like in the newspaper, I don't read it because I expect to find anything valuable, but it is valuable to know what everybody else is talking about and thinking or feeling, as I aren't thinking so much. And of course, most of my life, I've been involved in volatile, speculative, risky, often startup type things, not all in the mining business, believe me. So just don't be afraid to sell. Just don't be afraid to sell. I mean, we're all afraid that, oh God, we're going to sell the next Microsoft, which you should have held on forever after it started. And other companies like that. You're always afraid of that. But get your initial capital off the table and take a free ride. And then you don't have to sweat it so much. I mean, that's the best advice, probably. Even if it looks like it's going to be the next Microsoft, get your capital off the table at some point and just keep the rest if you're inclined to.
Yeah. I think some of the best advice I ever got about it is, and it's not very good technical advice about what specifically to do, but it's more the psychology part, I guess, which is that if you worry about it, if you own something that's gone up and you are worried about if it goes down, if you can test in yourself how you feel if it pulls back 15 or 20%, and that feels really bad to you, then you should sell. You have too much of that asset. You should sell, take some of your capital off the table.
Yeah. And of course, the question is, well, now where do I put my money?
That's another question.
Yeah, cosmic problems.
All right. Next question. He says, I feel that Brazil is one of the only investable BRIC nations at this time. Do you agree with that?
Well, let's see, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Yes, I would say that's correct.
I mean, you literally can't invest in Russia right now.
No.
So it's
And
literally investable.
and I just can't get a grip on India. There certainly have been some winning companies there, but they're too obscure. And in China, yeah, I guess this is the Chinese century coming up, but maybe not. Maybe China is going to break up into a half a dozen countries and all of its banks are going to implode. And Mrs. Wong is going to be really unhappy. And maybe they'll do something stupid with Taiwan that'll spin out of control. I don't know if I want to own anything in China right now, either. Brazil, yeah, of those, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Even if Lula wins, I doubt that he can screw it up. Even he can't screw it up that badly because it's a big place.
Okay. Next one. Last time I voted for Jimmy Carter. He says that brought us Billy Beer. He says, should we ANCAPs vote for a Republican ticket this November?
Yeah, well, Look, first of all, I've got to say that I don't vote. And I can run down the reasons why I don't vote. But I mean, look, nobody's vote counts. And if you vote for a Republican, what are you voting for? You're voting for basically empty. So most of these Republicans are like Mitt Romney lookalikes or wannabes, or John McCain lookalikes or wannabes. I mean, they have no principle. They have no philosophical core. I mean, they're basically whores that think the Democrats are going too far, too fast, most
Right.
of them. So, hey, listen, if it amuses you to vote, that's fine. But I don't see how it makes any difference, quite frankly. I mean, look, in a county election or a city
Yeah,
election,
well, that's different.
yeah, I can see that's right. These are with your neighbors, but in a national election, listen, voting for when you vote for the Republican instead of the Democrat, the Republican thinks that you actually support him, even though he's a complete scumbag. And it's like feeding power to him, even though he's not as bad a scumbag as the Democrat is. And I hate to feed any power, making him think that people like him and therefore he's got a mandate to do things. So there's lots of good arguments for not voting. And they say, well, if you don't vote, then it's your fault. Who are you going to blame? Well, no, it's the people that voted fault. I'm blameless. They're the
Right.
ones that did it. So no.
I also think there's something I don't like what it does to my own psychology, Doug, because it's almost like you're when you consciously are making the choice to back a candidate and go out of your way to to vote for them. You're to me, it feels almost like I'm emasculating myself because I'm expecting some other guy far away to come and solve my problems for me. You know what I mean? Because
I think
I'm hiring a hero to take care of to take on the challenges of the day rather than doing it myself.
yeah, and you're like joining a mob of ignoramuses. I mean,
Exactly.
I don't want to trounce down there with all the other idiots and pull a lever. It's kind of degrading, to tell you the truth. So, look, I supported when Harry Brown was running as I gave money to Ron Paul, and I was the largest single contributor to Harry Brown's campaign back when he was running for president as a libertarian. But I wouldn't even vote for a libertarian now. Why is that? Because the people, and I don't know who they are.
They are better now, though. The
Huh?
Mises caucus is kind of in charge now, so they are much, much better. But
Much better. Okay. Yeah, because it always seemed to me that, at least until this palace coup, which I don't
yeah,
know anything about, but I think you're right. They were just losers that wanted to be big fish in a little cesspool as opposed to little fish in a big cesspool.
yeah.
So
But even that, to me, the idea though is that it's almost like absolving myself of the obligation to actually work with what I've got around me to fix my own problems. Instead, I'm hoping that someone else is going to be fixing problems that are mostly abstract to me, by the way. They're going to be fixing even the idea of the national debt is a very abstract problem in my life. And
yeah,
hiring a champion to take care of that for me, I don't think it's going to do anything either. But there are things I can do to improve my life for sure and focus on
yeah, you're right. During the Vietnam War, there used to be this meme. Suppose they gave a war and nobody came. Well, yeah, I'd buy that. Well, hey, let's take a little bit further. Suppose they gave a tax and nobody paid. Suppose they gave an election and nobody voted. I mean, I want to disenfranchise and delegitimize the state, not support it by joining in its silly game.
exactly. Okay, Doug, last year we did a take on New Zealand. And so the question is, if you had a choice, which you have had a choice, would you take a farm or a bolt hole in New Zealand or Uruguay and why?
Well, I used to have a farm and actually a lot of real estate in New Zealand, and it was very good to me because I bought it basically. I mean, it basically paid for my polo career. Uh,
Which is an expensive hobby.
Expensive, really stupid. It's like running a small business that hemorrhages money. It's really pretty stupid.
And where you get injured all the time.
Yeah.
You got to add
On,
that to it.
on the bright side, and there are other bright sides, it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on playing polo. I just love it. But anyway, so New Zealand was very good to me. But that's because we bought stuff And when the Kiwi dollar was like 38 cents and it got as high as 70 something, and there was a boom in New Zealand property and so forth. So, but I don't think you can buy anything in New Zealand now because they've got a communist who's very popular. This woman, Ahern, I think her name is. And the problem with New Zealand, and it was always a problem with New Zealand, is that if Australia was founded by criminals, New Zealand was founded by serfs.
Mm.
And there's this thing in the water about the tall poppy syndrome and so forth. That's socialism kind of it dominates there. It's unfortunate. I like New Zealand. I enjoyed being there. I like Kiwis as individuals. But and of course now all these billionaires have bunkers down there, and I think the local Kiwis resent it. Actually, Uruguay, even though unfortunately the native language is not English, at the moment is a better choice. Of course, that could change with the next election too. They could elect their own Lula or Chavez or Maduro or one of these morons.
Oh,
They're
the
entirely
last socialist they had here didn't seem like it seemed relatively harmless.
Yeah, that was Mujica.
Yeah.
And he was somebody that you think, well, he should have been pretty harmful. But I think it was when Mujica was in office, the last president, the current president of Uruguay is a pretty good guy as these things go. And the Uruguayans, I mean, they've done lots of stupid things recently. They had a plebiscite, not a law, not just a plebiscite to put in an income tax. Talk about really stupid. I mean, they did it. They didn't have an income tax before, and now they got one. I don't know, it was probably 10 years ago. I can't remember. About then or less. And what else have they done? They have a 0.00 drunk driving thing,
Yep. No
which is
tolerance.
completely insane in a resort community, which is what Punta is. So there's all kinds of malicious factors in every country in the world. When have they passed a law that have made things freer and better and for the average person?
Well, they
Anybody?
did hit the gun laws here in Uruguay. They were made much
Oh,
better.
oh, that's a good point. Yeah, it's
Expanded the amount of guns you can own.
eight, right? Is that right?
Yep. And they basically have a form of the castle doctrine, which is more clearly codified, so that if you happen to kill someone who's in your house, then if someone breaks in your house and you kill them, as the defense for you is much greater than it was before. You have a right to defend yourself, essentially.
Yeah, that's a plus. Okay, couple of good counts.
These are just a little couple of them. I'm sure there's as many downsides to that upside that happened at the same time.
Yeah, I've been reading it for the last week. I got to tell you, I am mightily amused by this book. I've been to Paraguay twice for probably, I don't know, a week each time. And it's a weird place. But I want to recommend to all the listeners that they read this book. It's called Paradise with Serpents by a guy named Robert Carver. And it is a laugh riot, A. And B, I believe it's an accurate description of Paraguay, which in fact is one of the weirdest countries in the world. And even when I was there and I thought it was weird, I didn't realize, because this guy spent a lot of time there, it's even weirder than I thought. So there's places other than Uruguay that might be interesting to hang out in South America.
And I know a lot of our viewers are in the process of getting a residency there. And I've heard a little chatter on our Telegram group from different people who are doing that. So,
Oh, in Paraguay.
yep.
Yeah, good idea. Because it's one of the most readily available passports, actually, and cheapest. And as corrupt as Uruguay is, I don't understand why they haven't made it expensive.
I mean, Paraguay, as corrupt as Paraguay is.
As corrupt as Paraguay, it's not Uruguay. Uruguay is not really corrupt at all.
Yep. Okay, let's see. Next question here is, what do you see as the landscape for control of the West? Is it all one giant group dictating policy, or are there factions fighting behind the scenes? Not looking for a good guy, bad guy here, but with your knowledge of history, it would be nice to get a lineup of who the players are and what each sees as a win.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it boils down to founding principles of a country and the culture that arises thereby, because generally speaking, people kind of observe the laws and play the game where most of their neighbors believe certain things and have certain attitudes. So some countries are much better that way than others. That's why the United States was really unique. But I think the whole world is more or less going in the wrong direction at this point. I can't think of any country that is going in the right direction from a point of view of personal freedom and
Yeah, I agree. And not only do you not see any country that's going in a different direction. Everyone's basically still going in the same direction, I think. Even I know there's some people who are just big supporters of Russia and think that somehow Putin is different and what's happening in Russia is different. But they had vaccines there. They had some controls on movement. They had a lot of the same problems that the rest of the world did during the COVID period. But I don't see any even faction within a country that's even doing anything any different either. You know what I mean? So it's not like what Tom Luongo's idea that the Fed is maybe the good guys, or at least closest thing to the good guys, and they're attacking these other moneyed interests around the world. I mean, perhaps in some ways that might be true, but at the same time, it seems like more or less everyone's more or less on the same page, more or less moving things into reduction of personal freedom, destruction of capital, and basically some sort of algorithm ghetto.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I wish I knew if there was an exception to that somewhere, but I'm personally unaware of one. And I try to stay on top of these things.
Yep. I think there's a little resistance, a little in different places, but I don't think there's competing interests really, unfortunately.
No, not really. The best thing is to take over your own country and tighten things up. Well, that's what Charles Knight's going to do in the novel After Terrorist, which is being called Warlord.
Hmm.
I'll talk about there how you take over a country and what you do with it after you take it over. So don't fall behind in this series.
In serious. All right, Doug, looking at gold and silver stocks set up right now, and compare that to what we saw in 2008, kind of right before we tipped over the edge of the financial crisis. What's different and what's the same about the way the stocks are positioned right now?
I think the stock market is even more of a bubble now than it was then. The government has created lots more money since then. That's mostly gone into the financial market. The general economy is much weaker and more dangerous. So I think the upshot is likely to be as bad or worse.
Hmm.
On the other hand, after the meltdowns of recent years, and there were several besides 2008, maybe the powers that be are manning their battle stations and their cubicles in the Eccles building, preparing for this so that maybe danger will strike from a direction we're not expecting. So hard to say. I wish I had definitive answers for some of these things. I wish somebody had definitive answers for them.
It's just all new territory. I was thinking about the gold because I was invested in gold and silver going into that, really expected them to do well, knowing how precarious the financial situation was. But gold and silver stocks and gold and silver themselves had gone up a lot over that prior like 4 or 5 years. So they'd already appreciated quite a bit. I mean, I think the first gold I bought was a little under $300, and maybe that was in 2002 or something like that. So in that 6-year period, it got up, maybe it was 1100 or something. So it had gone up quite a bit, kind of going into the financial crisis. And then, so it didn't, and it seems like now while gold has gone up, certainly some from the $1,200 lows or whatever a few years ago, it doesn't seem to me that it's these stock, and certainly stocks have not appreciated in the same way. It seems like that sector seems much more beaten down going into this potential crisis than it felt like things were in 2007, 2008, but I might be remembering that wrong. I don't know.
Well, the bet I'm placing is that with all this funny money out there today, that inflation running hot, that there will be other bubbles that will appear, even though it's a general bear market. And I'm betting that as this happened, I don't know, a half a dozen times since gold was divorced from the dollar in 1971, that there's going to be a panic into these gold stocks. And there's such a teeny weeny little part of the market. It's not going to take a lot for these things to fly. Now, that's the bet I'm making. Am I right or wrong? Well, we just don't know. I think I'm right, but There's no certainty.
No certainty. In fact, I think there's complete uncertainty about everything right now, which makes this both a scary time to be paying attention to world events, but also a very interesting time.
Yeah. So I guess we all have to keep our eyes out for some real anomaly that makes sense that we can jump on and profit from. I'm sure that it'll appear. Don't know what it is now, but it'll materialize. Hopefully, we'll see it before it's too late.
Yeah, hopefully. Okay, somebody asks, somebody has a half of their gold and silver, their physical gold and silver stored in the US, and they have another half of it stored abroad in one of those vaults. Maybe it's a Swiss vault, I'm not sure, but something like that, one of those professional holders. Do you think it's a good idea to keep it that way, where you have half of it with you and half of it in one of these professional vaults overseas, or for diversification, or does it make sense to repatriate it, to bring it all, or have it all near you?
No, I think it makes sense to have half abroad and half in your home country because I've said this many times. It is as serious as the market risks are today. Your political risks are actually at least as great or greater. So yeah, if you got it abroad, keep it abroad. If you don't have it abroad, put it abroad so that you can go to it. I mean, because anything can happen. They can, yeah, 50-50.
Okay. All right, just a few more questions. Doug, what's your take? And we got into this question, something like this before, but curious what Doug's take is on Martin Armstrong's Socrates. And have you ever utilized anything along that type of information for your own investments?
I don't know Armstrong. He seems like a person of goodwill and sound, but I don't know. One thing that doesn't make any sense to me is that what is this black box that magically come? This impresses me as bullshit, but I don't know. Has he generally guessed right on the markets or not?
Seems to me he makes a lot of predictions. So he can always find ones where he's right on because he is making active predictions all the time. So he is right sometimes, but he's not always right, at least as far as I can tell. Again, I don't follow everything he does. But I like you, I'm very suspicious of any God box that gives you all the answers. Like that always doesn't seem right to me, especially when it's built on technology that he's had for something like 30 years. I would imagine that whatever complex software program he was able to create 30 years ago would be outdone by anybody creating something today.
Yeah, exactly. And if he's a good market guy,
Yep.
he's got good judgment, well, you don't have to gussy it up with some bullshit 30-year-old computer. I mean, that just doesn't pass the smell test.
But it's something I can tell you, young man doing,
Seems old.
Yeah, he definitely seems okay.
I'd like to meet him. Yeah, I don't know. Where does he live?
I think he's on the East Coast. I don't know exactly. I think he might be in Philadelphia, maybe. I don't know why I have that impression, but yeah.
Well, I'd like to know more. I've certainly heard about him, but don't have anything that's
okay. All right, let's see. Just do a couple more questions here. Curious what Doug's take is on Marin's idea that investments in countries with direct US dollar swap lines to the Fed will have a critical advantage over investments in countries that don't, which Marin thinks is especially important in times like these.
Well, Marin's a smart guy. I think he's gone a little bit off the rails in the last 6 months, quite frankly, with his carbon stuff and everything. But the swap line, it was a good idea. Look, basically, Marin, the bottom line on it is don't invest in or speculate even in AK-47 countries. That's pretty good advice where the criminal gang that takes over the government will do their best to steal stuff from you. I mean, stick with countries that have kind of a rule of law, and therefore the Fed will make assets available to. Yeah, I mean, that's good common sense. Yeah,
but you'd probably come to that same conclusion by using a different factor, even like you said, use an AK-47 factor would basically draw you to the same conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's no magic form. It's good marketing. It's not necessarily the way the world works all the time.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, last question, and this relates to some of the specific resource recommendations that we made in the file subscription service. This guy says, new to small cap resource investing. And he says he's looking at the first set of stocks that were included in the recommendation. We won't mention them here, but he's saying, is the objective generally cash flow from dividends or appreciation, or is it to have a diversified portfolio of both plus geographic and commodity diversification? He said, so I guess the question is, what's a portfolio strategy for commodities investing in general? And I think the reason for this confusion about this is because the stocks that are in there are one, very small. Many of them are small. They have huge speculative upside potential, and yet several of them pay huge dividends right now. So like that combination of those things doesn't really fit, I think, what most people think of as a speculation. But I think that's what makes these so unique and so interesting.
Yeah. Well, a bad speculation is one that everybody knows about, therefore has a huge market cap and probably a teeny weeny dividend yield because the shares are up so much and selling at a high PE ratio. So look, a good speculation, a fantastic speculation can, ideally should have a huge dividend yield. And I'll draw a couple of things to your attention to answer this question. Done this before, maybe everybody didn't hear it and so forth, is that in the mid 1970s, when South Africa was the world's leading gold producer, produced more than half of the world's gold in those days. There were a class of South African gold stocks. I can still name them because they were very good to me. Some of you all out there might remember them. There were names like Goodfly and Leslie and Stilfontein and Bracken and a couple of others that at the bottom, especially when they had exactly when gold fell from $200 to $100 and there were riots in Soweto and it was as bad as it could get. Those stocks had current dividend yields of 50 to 75%. Those are what we call fat dividend yields. And as gold subsequently went from 1976 to 1980, went from $100 to $800, those dividend yields doubled and redoubled. Yeah. And so did the price of the stocks, more so actually. So answer to the question, yeah, it can happen. Another example, back in about 1982, I had a chapter on these things must have been my strategic investing book. Utilities, U.S. electric utilities, okay? Supply your power. Typical yields were 12 to 15%. And the yields went up a lot and the stock prices went up. And I owned those things. I actually bought them because it was wonderful. So that was like high dividend yields, or sometimes it's a sign that the dividend's about to be cut. But on the other hand, sometimes it's as Holy Mother of the Church like to say, it can be an outward sign of inward grace.
They actually reward shareholders. Yeah.
Exactly. They actually reward shareholders. Another example, this is the third good one that I can think of right now that I've used before, is back in the mid 80s, because the South African gold stocks were in the mid 70s. In the mid 80s, there were three major stock markets: Hong Kong, Belgium, and what's the last one? Jesus, got to look at what. Well, anyway, certainly Hong Kong and Belgium were two of them. What was the third? Was it Spain? Could have been. Anyway, all three of them were selling at roughly 3-4 times earnings, half of book value, and the indexes. I'm not talking about anomalous stocks. I'm talking about the national indexes were yielding 12 to 15% in dividends.
Wow.
And that was the bell ringing at the bottom of the market. And that was in my newsletter at the time. So yeah, I think dividends are nice when you can get them. But
Yeah.
of course, with these crappy little speculative stocks, they're generally too early stage to be paying dividends.
But that's what I really liked about a lot of the picks that you came up with, is that there's some in there that are very small, but paying a dividend today, which you almost expect. And some of them, there's one that the dividend is 12%. And it's a small little thing that seems very secure and stable. And if the price of copper goes up, it's going to go up a lot. So I don't know. I guess I normally associate it with much more, you're buying things that like almost like a junior explorer or something, where might have some discovery that's actually it's bought out by some big producer and there's a huge windfall for everybody, or else it's nothing. It's almost like that kind of thing. But there's a lot better speculations, I guess, than those, as you've demonstrated.
Yeah. That's right. Ideally, I mean, just because it's a speculation, oddly, doesn't mean that it has to be high risk.
That's
I mean,
amazing.
that doesn't necessarily correlate.
That's amazing. I'm gonna think more about that because I certainly always assumed it did. Okay. All right. Well, Doug. Well, thanks for
I'd like to find more. They don't really grow on trees, but I'd like to find more.
We'll find more. We'll share them with the file as we do.
Yeah.
So,
I'm on the lookout for them, actually.
all right. Well, good. I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Matt.